Hello, so I'm just going to talk really quickly about some advice that I found helped me learn languages really well. So, a little bit of backstory. I really like learning new languages because I think it gives me a great insight into the culture and everything. However, I'm someone who I feel like once I have the vocabulary down and I kind of know the grammar in theory, I have a huge issue with practicing the grammar, and I think that once you reach an intermediate level, it can be kind of hard to file at your language skills. So I'm going to give you all some tips on how to work on that because I find that for me that's been the biggest challenge. So the first thing I do, which is just random, is I have this book called Basic Spanish Grammar. Now I've learned basic Spanish grammar so many times already because I kept taking breaks in between my learning. However, I try to just flip through this like every morning and night, and sometimes I'll start from the beginning, sometimes I'll start from the end or the middle, and I find that just helps me kind of remember things. And I know you think, why would you start from the beginning? It's like numbers and things like that. I think it is easy to forget even present conjugations, trust me. Like, I've learned Spanish for so long, and like I said over and over again. However, I find that when you're talking, it almost has to be like second nature, and so you gotta remember those irregular verbs. So for me, this just helps. So this is just a random book. It's not a textbook. It doesn't have any background information or anything. It just has example sentence after example sentence, and I find that this really helps. These also aren't my notes. This was a gift, so that's just the first tip. The second thing I'm going to say is to really be cognizant of how you speak. So for me, one thing that I found is that if I don't like a certain grammatical constellation, I just will avoid it. So for example, there are easier ways to say things. So if you don't want to conjugate words in English, for example, you can just say, I like to this, I like to do that, I like to that, or use can, I can do this, I can do that, I can do that. However, that's not the best way. I think if you want to learn a language, you really have to conjugate things. This is, similar in Spanish. What I found, there are two forms of the future. There's like voy a hacerlo, or something like trabajaré. Oh my God! See, this is why I have to practice, because it is easy to make mistakes, especially in a context like this. Like, I feel like I am more nervous about my language skills in this context. So yeah, like I said. It is very important I'm going to keep that in, by the way, just to show that it's a constant process to learn a language. So I think it's important to try to challenge yourself with forms. Even if you don't want to use the complicated form, really use it to make sure you're really using all those different forms. Another advice I'd have for you is a great way to obviously practice your language is to take courses, organized courses. So I actually have an experience with this. If you're taking an organized class, please make sure you show off the language skills you have. So I had an interview once to be placed into a course, and I was really tired that day, and they were like, what did you do last weekend, to see if I could, use the past tense, and I had done nothing that weekend really, so I was like, yeah, stuff. I went to the supermarket, and I don't really know. Don't answer like that, please. It makes you look like you just don't know what you're talking about. If you have an interview, maybe try to prepare and try to elaborate to make sure you can actually speak the language, because otherwise they'll, assume that you genuinely can't. So I think to make use of everyone's time properly, make sure that you answer the questions with enough detail and with a language that really shows that you are able to speak the language. Another piece of advice I have for you is that I just discovered this platform called Italki, which is basically this community tutoring site where you can speak to someone, a native speaker of foreign languages, and I find that very helpful because you can just talk about whatever. And I think that's a great way to just practice your everyday conversation if that's something you struggle with. As I mentioned before, my issue is more that I tend to just forget all grammar. I think, for sure be confident in your speaking. So make sure that you make that clear. If you're talking to people, tell them, please, if I make a mistake, remind myself, or it's even better, I think, to get to a point where if you make a mistake, you can realize it and correct yourself. Okay. So another option I have is obviously you can travel to the place or something like that. One anecdote I'd give with this is I know that when I was learning Spanish, I traveled to Argentina to practice my Spanish. Don't be afraid if you can't say things. Don't let it kind of hinder you. I feel like I'm one of those people who, if I go to a place and I kind of speak the language, or even if I don't, I've been to Italy, I don't speak Italian, but I want to make sure I, try to speak people's language. Make sure that if it impacts what you're getting, you don't feel ashamed to speak English. I know obviously you should make an effort to speak it, but I know one time I was ordering pizza in Argentina. I didn't know how to say a slice of pizza, so I asked for pizza and I assumed that they might give me a slice, but they ended up giving me an entire pizza. Um, that's fine and it happens, and for me it wasn't like a huge deal, but make sure that if you're having any trouble, like, feel free to get out your translator, feel free to, actually show that, you need help with the language. So I mean, I don't know, just don't be like me and just try to only speak the language, because I do think, if it impacts your daily life, you should also not feel afraid to speak English. What else? So yeah, I'd say another thing, this is kind of something I mentioned before, is to make use of more complicated forms because it is very helpful, and to really make sure you're practicing all those grammatical forms that you have to practice. My last tip would be to also just keep learning new languages. I think the more languages you can speak, the more open your mind gets. So I know that some people say this is counterintuitive because you can mix them up. Personally, I have not experienced that, just for me personally. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but there are great resources to learn new languages, like YouTube videos that play just basic phrases, or Duolingo, as you all know. There's also the State Department made tapes available from the 1970s or a long time ago that are available in the public domain, of the language tapes they used to use to help State Department officials back in the olden days. And they're not the most fascinating conversations you'll learn, but they can teach you how to say hello, get by. So I've been using those to learn Portuguese, and I think that that's been very helpful as well. Because I feel like every language you learn, you can learn new nuances about language. I'm very into linguistics, so maybe this is just something that fascinates me. Even if I don't feel like I'm gonna, be fluent in that language, I do love learning new languages. So that's something that also helps, and it can activate certain parts of your brain. So I think that was all that I really had to contribute to this conversation. I'm going to leave some links in the description of those State Department websites, Italki, and anything else I mentioned. But I hope this video was somewhat helpful. It was quite rambly. I feel like I just decided to do this, without thinking too much. So if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. And once again, I think language learning is a great tool to help people. And yeah, so I hope this was helpful in any way. Thank you very much.